Hey folks, it's the Red, and it's time for another Red-trospective review. Today I'm going to be talking about a series that, until recently, I hadn't really paid that much attention to. That is the Kid Icarus series. Kid Icarus is an action-adventure series that draws a lot of influence from Greek mythology, as evidenced from the items, monsters, and characters that you meet throughout the series. It's a pretty intriguing series, and I look forward to talking with you about it today. It's just a shame that these games, until recently, were pretty much only kept on the earliest of Nintendo systems. But let's go on and see just what this series has to offer, shall we? So, to kick things off, I suppose it only makes sense to start where the series started. So, let's have a look at the original Kid Icarus on the NES. By the way, probably worth noting, but this guy's name is Pit, and not Kid Icarus. Because, you know, naming. What this game is basically trying to be is a hybrid of some of Nintendo's most popular franchises at the time, specifically Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid. So here's how our story unfolds. In the Kingdom of Angel Land, there are two goddesses named Palutena and Medusa, who rule over the land. But Medusa doesn't really like mankind, and would start drying up their crops and turning them into stone. And so Palutena does what any person would naturally do in her position: turn her into a monster and banish her to the underworld. Medusa forms an alliance with the monsters of the underworld. A war is started with Palutena's army, and Palutena loses. Most of Palutena's army is turned into statues, while the others are captured and brought back to the underworld. And as for Palutena herself, well, she was sealed inside a palace in the sky. And on top of all that, the three sacred treasures have been stolen. Indeed, all hell is broken loose. So, using the last of her strength, she magically sends a bow and arrow to her most trusted soldier, Pit, who uses it to launch an escape from the underworld, and so he sets out to find the three sacred treasures and stop Medusa. So that's all well and good, but what about the game itself? You'll find lots of platforming elements, much like in the Super Mario games. You collect treasure and trinkets, just like in the Zelda games. And you shoot stuff, a la Metroid. Also probably noteworthy, Pit and Samus seem to have about the same firing range as well. That is to say, pretty pathetic. And how about the difficulty? Well, let me tell you, this thing is hard.
What an odd thing to say.
At least in the very beginning of the game, it is entirely accurate to call it Nintendo hard. It's unlikely that most players are going to see beyond the first 3 levels of the game, which make up the underworld, because of the volumes of enemies, the powerful amounts of enemies, and the fact that you can plummet off the bottom of the screen and die. Oh yeah, in these stages, the screen scrolls upward, rather than left to right, which means that if you fall down too far, it doesn't scroll with you and you just fall to your death. And as if that wasn't bad enough, you also have an incredibly low amount of health at the very beginning of the game, and not very many opportunities to heal, so it's entirely likely that you will also die from taking excess damage. When you reach a certain score, you'll be able to increase your life bar, so it is worth your time to kill as many things as you possibly can. You're going to want to do this anyway, because this is also how you get arrow upgrades, to let you attack with more power. Because of the amount of things that you have to be killing along the way, the game can feel pretty grindy at times. And trust me, some of these enemies take forever to kill. I really hate these Grim Reapers, especially the ones that appear at the very beginning of the game, you know, when your bow is at its weakest. It takes a ton of hits to take this thing down, and you can't be in its line of sight or it's going to call in a bunch of little minions to come and attack you. As a result, you may be waiting a little while before you can actually make any forward progress. So to summarize, low health bar, weak attack power, a bottomless pit that follows you up the screen, tons of enemies that move all over the place, and lots of powerful enemies that take forever to kill, make these first 3 stages some of the most difficult I have ever seen. But it's not all bad. See, defeated enemies drop hearts, but you'll never believe what they're used for. Get this, you use them to buy stuff in shops. Really? Whenever I pick up a heart, I expect to either regain some lost energy or get an extra life. But here, it's used as your currency. I can safely say I have never seen a heart used in this way. Skyworld has some weird standards. Oh yeah, this game has shops, another Zelda hand-me-down. You'll also find some mini-games and other bonus rooms where you can get more hearts and upgrades. Should you manage to make it past these first 3 stages, you will finally make it to the first Labyrinth of the game. Oh yeah, yet another Zelda hand-me-down. You'll have to navigate your way through this labyrinth, find the boss room, and defeat the boss. And to help you do so, there are 3 items that you can collect to help you find your way around. The map, a pencil, and a torch. Collect all 3, and then you'll be able to see where you are, all the rooms you can go to, and which rooms you have already been to. That all may sound useful, but once you actually see the map, you see that that is not the case. I mean, wow, they could have really done a better job with these maps. The maps in Zelda 1 are more reliable than this. How did they screw it up so bad here? Oh, and if you thought the Reapers were bad, oh boy. You have not met the worst enemy in the game. Say hello to the Eggplant Wizards. They also take a ton of hits to defeat, just like the Reapers. And on top of that, they will fire eggplant beams at you, and if you get hit by them, you will be turned into an eggplant. As comedic as that sounds, you are actually left defenseless while in this state, and so you need to seek out a hospital somewhere in the labyrinth, and then they can remove the curse, and you'll be able to shoot your bow again. So yeah, these guys are jerks. Another thing you'll find in these labyrinths are Centurion Statues. Depending on how many hammers you've collected, you'll be able to break them out and fly away. Then later on, once you finally reach the boss chamber, the Centurions will come down and help you fight it, by giving you extra firepower. So, the more Centurions you find in the labyrinth, the easier this boss fight will be. If you don't have enough hammers for the job, don't worry, because there are shops inside the labyrinth where you can get more. Anyway, once you finally find and beat the boss of the labyrinth, it's finally time to move on to World 2. And suddenly, the difficulty is going to drop by quite a bit. For one thing, there's going to be more opportunities to heal yourself via these hot springs.
That's not water, is it?
The enemies will be a little easier to kill as you will be able to see them coming more easily. You're scrolling from left to right rather than from bottom to top, which makes it less likely that you're going to fall to your death. And you have more health and more power on your bow by this point in the game. So yeah, suddenly the game feels a lot more playable. The third world is pretty similar to the first one, which might sound intimidating, but really by this point in the game, you're already pretty well geared up and ready to take on anything the stage might throw at you. So really the most difficult part of this world is the platforming segments. So you go through all the stages, you visit all 3 labyrinths, you beat all 3 bosses, and you get back the 3 sacred treasures. You put them on and you become the Amazing Pit! And in this final stage, you can fly around and shoot stuff. It's sort of like Gradius Light. And then comes the final battle with Medusa herself, and if I'm totally honest, this is one of the most disappointing final bosses in any game I've ever played. Yeah, this is right up there with Crash 2's final boss. You see, you can position yourself right here, and then she can't hit you with any of her attacks. On top of that, you're right in front of her eyes, so you can just spam shots at her. Yeah, this is quite a programming oversight. So to sum it all up, the first 3 stages of the game are ungodly hard, and after that, things become a lot more tolerable. The controls are overall alright, everything seems to be pretty responsive, but the controls for the platforming aren't quite as tight as, say, Super Mario, but they work for what they're worth. There's also this thing where you can duck while sliding around, which I'm pretty sure wasn't intended to be a part of the game. Not much to say graphic-wise, the characters and enemies all look very nice, and the pillars are a nice touch, but with a lack of backgrounds, there's not really much to say here. Overall, the game feels a bit unpolished, and as a result, I can't really score this better than a 5 out of 10. The game is good, but it's also undeniably flawed. But that would all be changing with the next game. About 5 years later, we would be getting Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, released November 1991 for the Game Boy. This game was developed by TOS, who seems to have a pretty good track record of games. They worked on things like the Game & Watch Gallery series. They also made Super Princess Peach, the legendary Starfy, and even co-developed for Splatoon. However, they were also responsible for bringing this to the DS. But I'll tackle that another time. Generally, when we look at handheld games, we view them as the watered-down, lackluster version of its console counterpart. Not the case here. Oh no, quite the opposite, really. I would argue that the Game Boy game is actually better than the NES version. Pretty much all the problems of the NES game seem to be addressed in this one. The controls are better, the difficulty is more fair, there are more opportunities to heal yourself, and most important of all, you don't die by falling off the bottom of the screen anymore. And if it can even be fathomed, I would even go as far as to say that the graphics in this game are better than on the NES, and this is only in black and white! So while the game structure is more or less the same as how it was in the NES, the story is still a little bit different. Palutena has a nightmare about an invasion from a demon called Orcos, and summons Pit to go through some training so that he may gain the power to use the 3 sacred treasures, because apparently he can't do that again, so that he could fight Orcos. To keep the 3 treasures safe while Pit is in the middle of his training, Palutena sends the 3 sacred treasures to each of the palace guardians, and so the adventure begins anew, for a completely different reason as from the first game. So once again, the aim of the game is to try and kill as many things as you possibly can, and get the highest score that you can. This is not only how you increase your health and your attack power, but it's relevant to the plot as well. See, much like in the first game, after you've completed the 3rd stage, you get the 3 sacred treasures to use for the final stage. However, if your training is insufficient and you don't kill enough things and you don't collect enough hearts and whatnot, then you'll only be able to wear the wings of Pegasus, and then you'll have to try and get the other 2 via minigames. So yeah, speedrunners and minimalists beware. It's all about the training with this game. It's all about making Pit as strong as he can be before the end of the game so that he can save the day. Show me what you got, Pit baby! A number of familiar enemies will appear in this game, such as the She-Mums, the Grim Reapers, and the Eggplant Wizards. But the bosses are all different. And they're a lot stronger this time around, so be prepared. And unfortunately this time around, there are no Centurions found in the Labyrinth, so you're on your own against these guys. Check it out! The angel turns into an angel. Good. So you go through the course of the game, you've collected all 3 of the sacred treasures, and hopefully you've done enough training that you were able to get all the arrow upgrades, and Palutena will give you all 3 sacred treasures, allowing you to become Amazing Pit! And then you are able to go into the final stage fully decked out to go rescue Palutena, who indeed was captured by Orcos who came in and invaded. Who knew that Palutena's dreams were able to predict the future? The game ends with a 2-phase boss fight, which is a good bit more tricky than the first game, if not for the fact that you don't simply hover in one place and just shoot arrows until it dies. No, you actually have to dodge stuff this time around. It can be a little tricky, but if you have enough water bottles on hand, you should be able to power through it no problem. But if you're short on gear, like if you don't have all 3 of the sacred treasures, you might have a problem here. Overall, I am much happier with this game than I was with the NES game. If for nothing else because the difficulty is right where it should be. The first levels are made to be easier, which reflects the level of strength that you're at that point of the game, and then the difficult stages come later on, although it doesn't get much harder. This game may not be as memorable as the NES game, but it is still a very solid experience, and if you were a fan of the Kid Icarus games, then I would definitely give this one a recommendation. I give it a 7 out of 10. Unfortunately, at this point, after these 2 games were out, it would be over 20 years before another Kid Icarus game would see the light of day. And until then, all we had to look forward to as far as Kid Icarus related material was Pit's appearances in the Super Smash Bros. Games. He does technically make an appearance in Super Smash Bros. Melee as a trophy, and, well, the less that's said about that, the better. But then again, try to remember that when they were making this trophy that all they had to go on was some 2D artwork from the instruction manuals of the original games. But hey, I think I see a little foreshadowing in that description there. Will Pit ever fight again? The answer to that would be yes. Enter Super Smash Bros. Brawl, where Pit finally makes his appearance as a playable character. And fans were overjoyed by this. For being so light and nimble, he's also got quite a few powerful moves in his arsenal, specifically in his special attacks. I can't speak favorably for this side B, which is very difficult to avoid and very difficult to counter. So I'm glad they got rid of that in the next game. Combine that with the arrows that can be arced in any direction that you want, as well as one of the best up B recoveries in the series. Seriously, this guy can recover from anything. Anything short of a straight screen KO, he will come back. In the right hands, Pit could be a very difficult opponent to overcome. He appears once again in Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U, and his moveset is a bit more balanced than it was in Brawl, thankfully enough. And he's actually still a pretty good fighter. But this time he's not alone. It seems Palutena is even playable this time around. Not entirely sure why or how a goddess is participating in this, but whatever. But wait, who's this other guy here? Dark Pit? We hadn't seen him in any of the games, certainly not in the first two that we covered. Well, that's because he comes from the newly released Kid Icarus Uprising on the Nintendo 3DS, a game that I had neglected to mention up to this point because, well, I hadn't played the game before. I wanted to have a good look at the first two games before moving on to the new one, just so I can have an idea of where the series is coming from going into it. But now, the reviews are done, and now it's time to move on to my next planned project, the blind run of Kid Icarus Uprising. So I hope you're all looking forward to that, and until next time, I'm finished!